today's topic is changing scenario of media representation. So today's lecture, we are not talking exactly about changing scenario or the developments in Afghanistan, but how media represented those. Okay, and so of course we will refer to all the important events, but more in a, what you say, in the sense of how media has covered those events. Shahbaz sir gave a very kind introduction. I can just add one small thing. One of the reasons why I'm speaking today is very recently I completed an ICSSR sponsored project, which was on Afghanistan, in fact. And for the field work of this project in 2019, around this time, actually, August and September, I was in Afghanistan for my field work. And before that also, I had been to Afghanistan in 2014 during the presidential election. So 14 also and 19 also, during the presidential election, I was in actually Afghanistan. 14 only for roughly 10 days. This time, as in 2019, I was there for more than 6 weeks actually. Anyhow, so I mentioned about this just to in a way I can contrast what I experienced there and what things have changed. Anyhow, so while I'm talking, what I have done is, because it's about media representation, so I have made a brief slideshow, PowerPoint presentation, which is not like a lot of text, but I will just give reference to some of the photos or short videos while I'm talking. So let me just start my presentation, and then I'll keep talking as I share the presentation. Okay, so I hope the presentation is Shahbaz sir, if you could just confirm once if PPT is visible.
It is visible, sir.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, the topic of my presentation today is changing scenario of media representation of the Afghan crisis. Now, as sir pointed out, even Shahbaz sir also said in his introduction, is when the crisis we are talking about is not like, say, a one-day crisis or 1 week crisis or 1 month crisis or even 6 month crisis. It's almost, or in fact more than 4-decade-old crisis. Afghanistan has been in perpetual war / civil war for more than 4 decades now. And at least I'm saying 4 decades. Why? Because if one wants to connect the current problem, one can actually connect it with say colonial times and the things which happened during, say, British colonialism. Afghanistan, as sir must have pointed out in his lecture, it was not per se British colony, but during the colonial battle between Russian Empire on one side and later USSR and British Empire in India, the Afghanistan in a way was in between. It was like sandwiched between, say, Russian Empire on one side and British Empire on the other. And for a brief period, Afghanistan was declared kind of a buffer state. People who are from political science background will understand what buffer state is. So it's a state where, like, both Russians and British decided, okay, we will not conquer Afghanistan. We will let it be there. Something like Switzerland was there during world wars in Europe. So Afghanistan played that role between Russian Empire, but British had upper hands in the politics. They could change kings whenever they wanted, and they always installed their proxy kings. But to cut, I'm not going into those details a lot because already you had a lecture on those. The important events of last 4 decades are as follows. You can see on the screen. One was this 1973 coup. Sardar Daud Khan was actually a cousin of King Zahir Shah, the last king, and he also served as prime minister under Zahir Shah. But later he held a coup. The King Zahir Shah was sent on exile, and he became the president. Okay, that was in 1973. 1978 there was another very bloody revolution by communists. Okay, and in this revolution they killed, they assassinated whole entire family of Daud Khan. Then there was this communist revolution led to another phase where in succession different presidents were installed by Soviets. So earlier British Empire had upper hands. Now after this 1978 Saur revolution in particular, Russians gained more prominence. And in fact Soviets, not just Russians, but Soviets. But Soviet, you know that Russians were the more powerful. They were the main state. And then during this communist regime, this insurgency began. This insurgency was on the ideology of this insurgent was primarily Islamist, and they were called Mujahideen. Mujahid is a singular and Mujahideen is plural in Arabic. And after in 1989 Soviets withdrew. 1992 all of us know that USSR disintegrated, and that led to the collapse of President Najibullah government. And then the former Mujahideen together formed the government. There were first Mujaddidi was the interim president, then Rabbani became president, and there were other people, important warlords or former Mujahideen in the government. But civil war had ensued. Kabul became the main battleground. They were fighting against each other, and from that civil war Taliban emerged, and during 94 to onwards, 96 they captured Kabul, and then slowly they were capturing other capitals. 2001, you all know, we just had the 20th anniversary of 9/11. 9/11 happened, and then the new regime was installed. An interim government under Karzai was installed, and he later won election in 2004 and again in 2009. So and we all know why the reason we are here today is because Taliban installed. So in short, I have just summarized for you all what Sir presented in the last class. The reason I summarize these is because these important events in history of recent history of Afghanistan in a way determined how media covered them. Okay, so say during communist regime, USSR or in Soviet press, Afghanistan got very positive coverage. Okay, and to some extent even in India, okay, got very positive coverage. They were not, and also during Soviet time, once this global jihad began, this jihad was actually something which was supported by the West, not just supported by the West, planned and executed by the West. I mean here primarily in the important political powers. For example, we all know that CIA had very important role to play in this global jihad. Okay, and they trained, they provided the logistic support. The execution was done by Pakistan. The money came from UAE and Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, and the brain, the planning part was actually done by CIA. We all know that Osama bin Laden was in a way the conduit or the agent who coordinated things between CIA or the US, the Gulf countries, and ISI and all these Mujahideen groups. So he was one of the main persons. There were others earlier like Azam and others, but he was one of the main guy who was coordinating this. Now, why am I mentioning about this? Because during this period, the Mujahideen got very positive coverage in media, especially in the Western media, not in the Soviet media, of course. In Soviet media, they were militants, they were terrorists. But for international media, for especially, I mean, Western media, these Mujahideens were presented as God-sent fighters fighting against infidel governments. Okay, this is how these people were presented. Okay, now, if we go before even those events, as I mentioned, during the First World War, or even before the First World War, Afghanistan was kind of buffer state, okay, between, say, Soviets and British India. By the way, today India does not have direct border with Afghanistan, but all of you are aware that till 1947, Indian border was still Durand Line. So India was direct neighbor of Afghanistan till 14th August 1947. Okay, after which the Pakistan came into existence. So in a way, and also as Sir had pointed in his lecture, during, say, Mauryan Empire, most of Kabul and also this Kandhar area was part of, say, Mauryan Empire. Okay, similarly during Mughals, for most of the period, Kabul was part of the Mughal Empire. Okay, so till British came, actually a large part of what is now Afghanistan was actually part of what we know as India. Okay, so, and also we all know that in India we have many Pathans. Okay, Pashtuns or Pathans. Afghans were mainly, like, when historically when we say Afghans, we actually meant Pashtuns. Okay, so Pashtuns or Afghans or Pathans, as we know them in India, you know, there are many Pathans or Khans in India, right? So India and Afghanistan had its own, what is now India and what is now Afghanistan has all historical linkages. So Afghans for us, or Pashtuns for us, were not something new. I'm sure all of us who are here in Bengal in particular know about Kabuliwala, the famous story of Rabindranath Tagore. Okay, this is one painting from painting of a poster, actually, of a film based on the short story by Tagore. Okay, so Kabuliwala, all of us, I'm sure, have read it in Bangla also, and also in English books, the translation of Kabuliwala. And that image of Kabuliwala, or we all have, there are many films, in fact, based on, like, either directly called Kabuliwala, or very recently, I think 2 years back, a film came which was called Bioscope Wala, which had Danny. Okay, slight adaptation of Kabuliwala. And I was, last night when I was preparing for this presentation, I actually I have seen this video before, but I just found out this video. This video was like a newsreel of 1947 Afghanistan Independence Day celebration. Okay, I'm not playing the newsreel at the moment. I can share the link later. But I was stuck in that video. One of the Afghan politician says that we Afghans are friends to all and foes to none. Foes, as you know, means enemies. So this was like Switzerland presented itself in Europe during the world wars. Afghanistan actually always tried to present itself as that. Former President Ashraf Ghani, who was also a professor, often talked about Afghanistan historically being a roundabout. That is, it's like a place where it's like what we call in Kolkata as island. Okay, when you are passing from different roads, there are these islands or roundabouts where different roads merge and you cross this. And this was the history of Afghanistan. Afghanistan historically is between, say, South Asia on one side and West Asia on the other, Central Asia in north, and Persia on the south. So that's the historical location of Afghanistan, and they benefited out of it, okay, many times, because they were roundabout, or the trades, they were these important on the Silk Route, they were important trade say trade centers, okay, and that helped them a lot. But because of this location, it also became a curse for them. And in recent times, in particular, all these like say international battle are being proxyly fought in Afghanistan, okay. And President Karzai often said that we don't want to be battleground for other countries. We don't want to fight proxy wars of, say, other foreign powers. So again, I'm coming back to the old image of Afghanistan, of the Kabuliwala image. Many of you young students may not be aware about it, but I'm sure Sir's generation, there was this hippie culture, okay, these Westerners who traveled in large groups, almost like gypsies to different countries. And in that hippie culture route, Iran and Afghanistan were important stopovers. Kabul in particular was important. Kabul, Herat were important stopovers within Afghanistan. And most of you who are on, say, social media, you must have seen those images. I have used one image in my too, like, say, this kind of image you must have seen on, say, Facebook or on social media of how Kabul was earlier in 1970s or 1980s, how Afghanistan was, what kind of dresses women were wearing in those times, and how Afghanistan has changed now, okay. So this different presentation or representation in media depended on the agenda. I will come back to the narrative part later, but this narrative was being set based on the agenda, okay. And so in last 4 decades, from being friends to all and foes to none, to these goody Kabuliwala who came, who loved, who sold carpets and shawls and dry fruits, Afghans suddenly became, especially in, say, these B-grade Bollywood films, as terrorists, okay, or whatever you call them, jihadi, and these Afghans with the coal in their eye, and the representations changed suddenly in past few decades. And it's not that only the representation changed and everything in Afghanistan was fine. As I told you, the historical events changed, and that determined how Afghanistan was being presented in media during different times. So, for example, I told you how during Soviet time, like first during monarchy, during Zahir Shah time and till Daud Khan time, in fact, Afghanistan was seen as very, like, say, friends to all and foes to none, that kind of image, okay. Then during communist time, within Soviet press, Afghanistan was presented as as having, like, progressing a lot, these kind of images which you saw, that the girls are going to schools and colleges, women are also working in offices, and there are new factories being set up. That was, of course, true, okay. I'm not saying those were not true, but there was the other side of what was happening. Once insurgency began, government and Soviet supported militia, they tried to suppress this insurgency. There are mass graves which kept coming up even now, okay, like unknown mass graves. thousands of people were killed during to suppress the insurgency. But instead of suppressing the insurgency, what it did was it fueled more insurgency. And again, I'm not going into history of the whole jihad and which happened in 80s and 90s, 80s and early 90s. Okay, but in short, what happened was Soviet press was trying to portray that everything is fine. There are these small problems of militia who are trying to disrupt the country, okay, disrupt the progress, who are trying to impose conservative laws on people, okay, who are Islamist, who are not modern, okay, who are anti-modern, who are anti-progress. This kind of image was being presented in Soviet press, and not just Soviet press, even in Afghan press, which was supported by the regime, had this kind of images. This was the time, by the way, when a Bollywood film was shot, Khuda Gawah. I'm sure all of you must have heard the name, Amitabh Bachchan. So during President Najibullah time, the film was shot in Afghanistan, and somehow he wanted to, in a way, present the picture of that old. He also, like, somehow was in agreement of portraying this image of old Afghans. Like, if you have seen Khuda Gawah film, you must have seen how Amitabh Bachchan and Danny and those main characters' role were portrayed. Okay, it's people who are ready to die for their honor, people who are very upright and principled men, honest people who for their promises are ready to even go to jail. Okay, Amitabh Bachchan spends almost a lifetime in jail for the crime he had not even committed. Okay, this was the film about, Khuda Gawah film. And somewhere, I'm not saying this was not a Afghan propaganda film. This film was made by Bollywood. Okay, but this there are connections. So, for example, Soviet India had very cordial relations with Soviets. Okay, so like I told you, in Soviet press, Afghanistan was presented as honest, and these people who are progressing, the things are fine. So this film, in a way, tried to present that things are normal in Afghanistan. Okay, these are traditional people who are honest, who can die for their honor, who can suffer for their honor, but will not surrender. Okay, this was the image, and President Najib played an important role in the shooting, because this film was shot in parts of North Afghanistan and also in Kabul. Okay, and of course it was shot during the civil war. So President Najib personally actually intervened to make this happen. So that way, this film, in a way, was an attempt by even the government indirectly to present a positive picture of Afghanistan. Anyhow, during this time was also as I told you, the Mujahideen movement was going. So once again, people who are on social media must have seen this image. Okay, these are old Mujahideen, some of the representatives of old Mujahideen who were invited to the White House. Okay, during this, I told you, the civil war, or the Mujahideen, the jihad, the global jihad, which was waged against the infidel government of the Soviets, okay, or their puppets in Afghanistan. So these people were actually invited to the White House, the representatives of different groups of Mujahideen. They were invited to the White House. They were assured by the White House. This is the news cutting of the Independent. Of course, this is not related to Afghanistan, but I just want to tell you, all of us know about this 9/11, what happened, and how Osama bin Laden has been killed, and how he was a global dreaded terrorist. But just see the first line. Okay, this news is of course not from Afghanistan, but it tells you how Osama bin Laden was presented in the Western media. Okay, anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. So this news is about how after Afghan, Soviet has USSR has collapsed. Now this anti-Soviet warrior, as you can see, this is Osama bin Laden. He is taking up development work, okay, in African countries. So that was the news about how he's taking he's portrayed as anti-Soviet warrior. He's not portrayed as a terrorist. He's not portrayed as a militant. Okay, he's portrayed as a warrior now who is working on road to peace. The irony is there. Okay, so who is a terrorist is a difficult question. When recently when Taliban took over, or in fact even before Taliban took over, when they were capturing one by one the provinces, this debate began even in India on social media. Okay, that is it fair to call Taliban terrorist? Are Taliban terrorist or not? Okay, now this is not a place to discuss this, but I just want to raise the issue that terrorist, militant, insurgents, armed groups, okay, these are different related terms, and how a particular media uses it has politics behind it. Okay, I will just give another example to point out what I'm trying to say. Kurds groups, I'm sure some of you know, they are an ethnic group who are in the border area of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, that area. Okay, so Kurds who are fighting in against say Turkey, within Turkey, Turkey calls them terrorists. But the Kurds who are fighting in Syria, they often get tacit support from Turkey, okay, or in Iraq. Okay, they don't call them terrorists. Okay, so that's just one example to show you, to tell you how the role changes. For example, similarly, there can be so many other groups. Okay, there are groups whom say Hezbollah, okay, or Hamas, for example. So many Western countries call them terrorists, would call them terrorists, but Hamas also has government in Palestine, okay, and for Palestinians, they will say that these are armed groups fighting against Israeli occupation, okay. So these are political terms, and different people use it as per their convenience, okay. So say a media like Al Jazeera often use the term like armed group. They will not say terrorist to anyone and everyone, except those who are declared terrorist groups by United Nations. Okay, because as I told you, for example, take the example of Taliban. Another example I'm giving you. Taliban till very recently was a terrorist group after 2002. Okay, after 2001, 9/11, in fact. But once USA started negotiating and talking to Taliban, they delisted many of the Taliban members from the wanted list. And one of the best example is the current interior minister of Afghanistan is still in the US wanted list. Okay, and there are, I think, 10 million or something bounty on him, and he is now the interior minister of Afghanistan, and he is there in Kabul, but of course US will not do anything to him. So what I'm saying is how representation of people change in media. Osama bin Laden was a warrior, was working for peace till 90s, okay, till early 90s, I mean. But once there were similarly, these mujahideens, they were presented as gods, as I told you, God sent warriors, knights. They were compared in media to the crusaders. They were compared to warriors, to the founding fathers of US and all those places. Okay. I will come back to that slide later, but what I was saying is till Osama bin Laden started attacking US interests, their embassies and hotels where Americans and foreigners were living in different countries, in Indonesia, in African countries, in Kenya, their embassy was attacked, and finally, of course, 9/11, and then Osama bin Laden, who was earlier the warrior, his image, he became the terrorist, and so the media representation of him also changed. Okay, similarly, as I told you, this Mujahideen, when they were fighting at the behest of course, it was not that US started this fight. There were this insurgency in Afghanistan, and US only came to support them, okay, because they wanted to teach Soviet a lesson. So in English we say in all language, in fact, enemy's enemy is your friend, okay. So as Afghans became friend of, or Afghan Mujahideen became friends of USA, because Soviets were enemies of the USA, okay. And Afghanistan got this image of, I'm sure all of you have heard this, grave diggers of the empire. If you talk to any Afghan, they hate this image, okay. They say this is the graveyard of Afghans. We Afghans who are dying for decades now, every day, okay. But for this is a very Orientalist image of Afghanistan being the grave diggers, because and this cliche we say is that it is very easy to come to Afghanistan, it is difficult to leave. British realized this, then Soviet realized this, then America is realizing it now, okay. So you can come and you can establish your whatever your proxy state, but then managing that state becomes very difficult in Afghanistan, and so you want to run away. Anyhow, so then I told you that civil war began in early 90s, when different these warlords or different Mujahideen groups started fighting among themselves, and out of that chaos emerged Taliban, okay. And that Taliban formed the government eventually, and they initially brought some stability, okay, some stability and some peace also, we can say. Maybe that peace was under the gun, under the fear of gun, but no, but it's a fact that civil war was going on for a year, and once they captured, for example now, okay, for 2 decades Afghanistan was never as safe, so to say, at least for common people, okay. Of course, people who worked in army or in government, they are being attacked, but common people feel now the things are like, you don't go out fearing that there will be bomb blast. The one reason being, the people who were blasting bombs are in power now, okay. So Taliban is in power, so there is no question of like, there are, of course there are other groups, but chances of bomb blast is very less now. So that way people do not have this fear, okay. But what I'm saying is, once Taliban came and some of their actions, for example, all of you must have seen this photo in social media. They detonated the remains, the ruins of the statue of Buddha in Bamiyan. Now again, all of you attended Sir lecture, I hope, so you must have heard that during ancient time, okay, the Afghanistan was one of the important centers of Buddhism as well, okay. There are many underground these ruins of temples and vihar are still being found during excavation. So one of the famous one, this Bamiyan Buddha, was actually exploded by Taliban's, okay. And there were all these the atrocities they committed on women. They banned TV channels and all. They banned films and all this stuff that got them a lot of negative publicity. Now Taliban is back to power in Afghanistan, and the same debate is going on. So here I would like to point one thing, that it was not that, like say, this kind of blue hijab, which are now increasingly black color. If you traveled beyond Kabul, okay, in rural area, this is part of the life, okay. Most women, I'm saying, not all women, most women, out of the traditions and the customs, wore this kind of dress. This problem of imposition of hijab is more an urban problem, okay. It's not really a rural problem so much, because in city it's women and girls who were studying in universities, who were working in NGOs, who have studied in Oxford, in Cambridge, in Harvard, in MIT, and have come back. They are finding it like they are not used to wearing hijab. So a sad reality, or maybe it's a, I don't know if it's right even to call it a joke, but after 15th August, demand for this veil or burqa increased a lot in Kabul and in other big cities, because every women were forced to buy and wear hijab. Not everyone even had this kind of hijab actually. This is more like Pashtuns wear this kind of hijab, even especially Tajik and Uzbek, not so much, okay, this kind of, or Hazara, not so much they wore this kind of hijab, especially in cities, as I said. Okay, so this I have already discussed about it, but you all know that after 9/11, a government was installed, and so suddenly, once again, from this image of Taliban atrocities and all, in Western media, the image, the discourse once again changed. Okay, especially in Western media. People started talking about democracy and how new schools are being set up, how people are studying, how scholarships are being given, how there is new developments every day on all fronts, human rights and women rights. Afghanistan, our parliament has not yet passed the bill on women reservation. Afghanistan deserved more than 1/4 of its seats for women parliament. Okay, so more than 1/4 of members were women. Okay, some of them became very famous. In fact, Fawzia Kufi and others, they became very active, and they often came in the international media. In India, they were often invited for interviews and all. And this President Karzai, as this new state builder, who is trying to establish a new state with human rights and with basic rights, with media freedom, all these many new channels started in Afghanistan, and this was the new narrative which was being set up in media. Okay. And I've just used some of the clips. For example, this women graduating from universities. This is the all Afghan girls band which who have performed in several countries. Okay, all of them are now, by the way, in Mexico. They have taken refuge in Mexico because they feared for their life. And of course, we know about Afghan cricket team. Many of their players are actually playing in the IPL. Rashid Khan, and there are a few more, in fact, Zardan, and I'm forgetting, there is one more in Hyderabad team. Okay, so there are 3-4 players who are playing in IPL. Their 2020 team is especially have been doing very well. I don't know what will happen to their team now. Maybe some of these players, maybe I don't know what will Rashid Khan and all do. So, but this was the story of last 20 years. Honestly, in last 20 years, there have been a lot of developments. Okay, on education front, on literacy, and especially education, literacy, and media. Civil society became very active. You must have seen these protests of women protesting in Kabul and all. Okay, that's a result of the last 20 years. In particular, this cricket is another media. Okay, there are so many, Tolo TV, for example, and so many other channels. I don't know if in India there was a new TV channel in Afghanistan which is called Zan TV. Zan in Farsi means women. Okay, so this was a channel entirely managed by, almost entirely, of course in technical team there were some men, okay, but almost entirely managed by women. Okay, and they focused on issues of women. I know there was one radio channel which started in India, Meow FM or something like this, but didn't really work. It had to stop. But last 5-6 years, this TV was working, Zan TV, focusing on issues of women, discussing issues of women. Okay, this is something which even in India we don't have at the moment. I don't know if other countries have. So these were commendable achievements of last 20 years. So it would be wrong to say that nothing happened in last 20 years. Okay, but having said this, I want to point out one thing, that in last 20 years there is hardly anything which is happening now in Afghanistan which was not happening in last 20 years. I mean, especially after the new government had the democratic government of Karzai was installed. Okay, I'm using the word installed because it was installed with the help of the Western and international powers. So what I was saying is how media narratives are set. So in the last 20 years, what was happening is these photographs you see on the screen, these were happening in big cities. Okay, and of course many of these people were coming from small places. There is this famous photograph, I forgot to use it, but you must have seen. There was this young poor boy who was a Messi fan, but he didn't have he wanted a jersey. So what his elder brother did was he made him a plastic jersey from a plastic bag, okay, which was of white and blue color. So this image became viral on social media, and then Messi actually sponsored him. Okay, he was learning football and studying in Kabul. He was staying in a hostel. He actually went to meet Messi in Dubai, I think, if I'm not wrong. Messi paid for him and Messi sponsored him. So there were these kind of stories from villages also, but this was primarily urban story. What was happening simultaneously in villages, and I'm not saying this was not covered, but not adequately, not as much, was that like during Soviet time when the Mujahideen insurgency was going on in the initial years, a state, the government, and especially their militia, okay, a communist sponsored militia, very brutally tried to suppress the insurgency. Similarly, during last 20 years, the regime, the government in Kabul, and especially US NATO forces, through their militias, okay, they tried to suppress the insurgency. So all of you must have heard about Salwa Judum, okay, which was there in Chhattisgarh. So it was kind of a militia supported by, they were called civic police, okay, and so not actually government police, but they were trying to fight the Naxals, okay. And most of them were actually former Naxals, or at least not even Naxal, but at least Adivasi. So it was like pitting Adivasi against Adivasis to fight Naxals. Similarly, in Afghanistan, for example, there were this KPO, Coast Police. Okay, what this was, Khost is a province in Afghanistan, eastern Afghanistan. So from one particular tribe of Pashtuns, they created the militia, okay, and to fight against another tribal community, okay, many of whom had joined, say Taliban. And this local fight, so this was not just international fight, it became very locally ingrained. Like my family has like say in Bengal, there are families who are traditionally CPM, and traditionally earlier they were Congress maybe, and now they are BJP or maybe Trinamool, okay. So, and this fight this fight is often at the level of family. So for example, my family is Congress and your family is communist. So that fight has been going on. He killed my brother, so I cannot have a good relation with him. I will never compromise with him. Okay, that kind of conflict, when you have crisis or conflict for 40 years, the battle goes very local, okay, and very complex. So there were these kind, and on suspicion of say that he's a terrorist. Now there were so many reports when night bombing happened. At night, these bombs were like there was some intelligence inputs. From where they got intelligence input? From these local people, okay, rival group intelligence, and they would bomb the entire village. Okay, they would attack the entire village. They would just drone bomb, or they would send some missiles. Okay, and in those attacks, sometimes 20, 30, 50, 100, 200, 300, entire village people got killed. This created lot of resentment against government, against USA, and this Taliban used to their advantage. That's one thing I want to say. The second thing is the, which I earlier told you, is that in rural area, all of these things about say women wearing hijab, women should not work in ministry, and all those things, this is, as I told you, is very urban thing. In people like us in India can understand this better. Okay, if you go to rural area, men and women would invariably, most of them would say, now our country has changed a lot, but still you will find many people who would say women should not work, women should stay at home, women should manage family. Now this is the kind of the people like say Taliban comprise of people from rural area who only studied in madrasas and who only learned to fight in last, as I told you, 4 decades of war is going on. So for 4 decades they have been fighting, the families have been fighting. So they are war hardened people. Their perception, their worldview is different from say the worldview we have. Okay, and so their perception about women is very different. Why I am pointing this is because the debate you see in media now, like say, so many Afghans come and say, when you say like someone like write on Facebook or Twitter, I stand with Afghan women. So there are many Afghans who turn back and say, where were you for last 2 decades? Were you similarly standing up for Afghan women when they were being bombarded or when their villages was being bombarded? Now, I'm not again going into history, but I'm just focusing on the media representation. Once the Taliban, I told you about how Mujahideen were presented earlier in 80s and early 90s. And then when Taliban committed some of those atrocities against say against women and like say those in 90s, the Bamiyan statue and all those stuff, Taliban got very negative press. Okay, even when as I told you, these things were happening in Afghanistan, simultaneously this was also happening. And there was this very famous image of Time magazine, which if you can read, it says, what happens if we leave Afghanistan? This was, I think, around at least 1 decade ago, okay, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. I think, if I'm not wrong, this is when this image, this Time cover story was presented, and they tried to show that so this is for those of you who don't know, this was a young woman who was suspected of having affair, and so her nose was chopped off by her family. Okay, this was happening while simultaneously while this was happening. Okay, both things were happening simultaneously. This was happening in urban areas mostly, and this was happening in rural areas, in some of these areas. And somehow these did get attention, but often in the in context to like say this kind of people who are from history or political science may have heard the term civilizing mission, okay, or white man burden. So women body was kind of objectified. Women were presented as like they need savior, they need to be saved, okay, by the West. And if you read media narratives on Afghanistan, you will see a lot of like say Afghanistan crisis is lot about political situation there. Okay, but a lot of debate on Afghanistan happens on the rights of the Afghan women. Now this is not to say that this is not important, but as I tried to explain you, that this need to be seen more in context to the local customs and traditions, and how the people have like the kind of patriarchal growth they had. Like I told you, they studied in madrasa and they hardly had much interaction with women. They are not exposed to the kind of education and experience that people like us or people like people like, say, people in the West are exposed to, and that is the result of those that is the result of what is happening. The Afghan conflict needs to be seen more in that perspective rather than just about, say, women rights. This is not to say, by the way, that women rights are not important. They are very important, as are rights of every individuals. Okay. But I'm just trying to put things in that perspective. Now, one more thing about Taliban was that Taliban, after I told you, after 9/11, the Western forces bombed Afghanistan and installed a new government, and Taliban was declared a terrorist group. Okay, these are just some of the images from 2019 when I traveled there. But you know that 2009, once US started talking to, this is one of the images from the Doha peace negotiation with the US. So once USA started negotiating with Taliban. In fact, even before, after this started happening after Osama bin Laden was killed. Okay, after 2011, this new narrative started that America needs to withdraw from Afghanistan, and they needed a justification for this. So then this debate about good Taliban and bad Taliban began. That there are people in the Taliban who want peace, okay, and with whom we can talk. There was this talk about Taliban 2.0, okay, that Taliban 2.0 or the new version of Taliban is more accommodative, is more inclusive. They have staying in Qatar for a very long time, and they would be willing. They are not as like they will not commit the same kind of atrocities as they have committed in the past. So this was Taliban, by the way, themselves never said all these things. They were very clear about their fundamentals. Okay, they said that, okay, whatever we have done in the past and we will do in the future will be based on Sharia. Okay, and on women issues, they always said we have no problem with women education or women working, but within the framework of the Sharia. So the framework of Sharia, as they interpret it, often always was there. Okay, but because USA wanted to withdraw from Afghanistan, so they tried to present a very like a sophisticated version of Taliban. Okay, especially the people who were in Qatar, this Taliban political leadership of the Qatar. Okay, in fact, there are these kind of reports coming that how within Taliban there is this internal fight going on between the political office, like these office bearers who were in Qatar, led by Mullah Brother and others, and the old Taliban, and who were actually fighting on the ground. Haqqani and others who think that they have won Afghanistan, and they want to impose their old strict version of rule. Okay, but we all, so somehow what I'm saying is, once America decided that they will withdraw from Afghanistan, they started justifying their what you say, their withdrawal, and they said that we need to talk to good Taliban. The Taliban has changed. Okay, all those kind of things. But and that in a way helped Taliban. There is this book by Thomas Johnson called Taliban Narratives. Okay, I think this book came in 2016 or 17, if I'm not wrong. That book is about how Taliban won the narrative battle. So Taliban, we all think, are these rural people from madrasa. They are not very educated. They are not tech savvy, and all those kind of image we will have. And America, on the other hand, are so educated, so powerful. All mobile network technology come from there. But Taliban defeated USA before 2021 in narrative battle. On social media, they got an edge. Taliban created a lot of online platforms. Okay, of course they are on Twitter and Facebook, but they also used WhatsApp. They also started many of their own online radio channels, online news platforms, and they used those platforms very smartly to spread their agenda, their info news. Okay, and that helped them build a narrative. Okay, but however, once Taliban came to power, I'm sure all of you have seen many images like this. This is from Kabul airport, how people started running. I'm sure you have seen that video or photo of three men actually fell down like they were hanging on the aeroplane, and they fell down and they died immediately. So these kind of images, and also post their takeover, these kind of images, okay, these journalists being beaten, okay, this is the photo of two journalists who were beaten by Taliban. But as I told you, Taliban has also changed. So this is our representation of this new changed reality of Kabul. But this is also one part of the reality. Taliban also, they know that, okay, there are many women who are protesting. So they, of course, they are trying to control those protests. But they know in this age of social media, it's not difficult, it's not possible entirely to suppress the voice. So what they are doing is they are using their own narratives also. They are also organizing these women protests of pro-Taliban people, okay, pro-Taliban women, and they are also trying to control their narratives. So I think I have spoken for almost more than an hour now. So I will stop with just last bit about, I have talked in general about Western media and all. So just a last bit about, I told you about how Afghans have been presented started with Kabuliwala. So I would just want to end with Bollywood and say, this is an article I wrote actually in 2019. I can share the link with you so you can read if you're interested. But just in short, that how in last 2 decades, even Bollywood in particular, like many of these international films, have usually portrayed Afghans, especially in last 2 decades. As I told you earlier, we had this image of Kabuliwala, but even especially in last 2-3 decades, Afghans and Pathans in general have been presented in a very negative, like they generally get very negative portrayal. And to sum up and to end, I would just say that this is all about battle of narratives, okay. So narratives are determined by the agenda of any media, and this narrative is used for the legitimization and for the larger benefit of the power, okay. So the just going back to the different phases which I mentioned about of history, okay, these different phases which I mentioned earlier, how has been determined in these terms, okay. This Mujahideen versus Jihadi. Mujahideen were good people in a way, but Jihadis were considered as bad people. This debate on good Taliban, bad Taliban, this debate on democracy and human rights on one side, and Sharia and local customs are actually determined based on the narratives. And it's actually for me as a student of international communication, this battle of narratives, or any, not just international, even in our own country, this battle at the level of idea is fascinating. And how different sides, so I just gave you an example of how Taliban you would think are weak, and they don't have they are not so educated, and they don't, maybe if you compare US capabilities and resources, and if you compare capabilities and resources of Afghans, and especially Taliban, they are like US are above in everything. But when it came to narrative in Afghanistan, US somehow lost, because Afghanistan strategically had a very clear idea and of how to fight this narrative. They were very clear about. I was reading a blog of a Taliban commander of how he's not just a soldier, he's a soldier who is also like he has to shoot. I mean, not just bullet shoot, but shoot with the camera. Okay, so when they go in a battle, they record the battlefield, they record the aftermath of the fight, and they use it there in their own communication channels very smartly. And that has in a way helped Taliban reach where they are, and that also helped fight the battle which in a way, like say, entire world in a way, the entire media, international media in a way, were against Taliban, but they in a way forced them to acknowledge them as, and they are now in power, and all these media are after them now to talk to them. I think with this I will end. If there are any questions or anything you want to say, then I would be happy to answer. I'm just stopping the presentation. Shavasha?
Thank you so much.
Please, sir.
Yes, sir. You can ask the question.
Please, sir. May I ask a question, sir, please?
Yes, sir. You can.
Yes, sir. Respectfully, I convey my hearty congratulations, sir, and speaker of today, as well as the Honorable Principal of Kandra College. My specific question is that, sir, every country in the modern world goes progressive. Unlike Afghanistan, what is the motive of such regressive attitude or outlook at all? That is, we see that present rulers' mindset is to impose artificial restrictions, especially on women in general, in particular, in the field of education and in the field of democracy as a whole. My question is, what is the motive behind it?
Should I answer, or like take a bunch of questions and then answer? Shavas sir, I will respond.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. You can answer.
Okay. So, sir, it's a complicated question actually. Very good question actually, but it's like, say, in Afghanistan, the government which is there now, Taliban, this is not a government which has been chosen by the people. Okay, there was no election and people voted for Taliban. By the way, the general right-wing trend of choosing government on the right is a global phenomenon. Okay, it's happening, like in US also it happened, and President Trump won, and in several other countries there is some support for the right-wing government. That's one thing. But the Taliban has not won any election. So Taliban has not come to power by winning an election. Taliban came to power by force. Okay. Now, why are the people who have come to power, they have their thoughts which are so regressive, to say, as you put it, is one reason being, it's like, say, it's a bad example. I should not compare. Different societies have different experience, but it's like, say, there are these in say rural Haryana, okay, Bengal, because this was like Calcutta was the capital under British, and so the quote-unquote modernization process in Bengal is very different. Even in rural area, this education and empowerment is much high. Okay, but like, say, many rural, even in India, many say in say rural Haryana, for example, or in rural UP, okay, there are these, say, group of, say, these men, or these, say, especially these khap panchayat which we have. Okay, so it's like, say, you install those khap panchayats who never had much exposure to the education and to the world, to Delhi, and ask them to rule the country. Okay, and in case of Taliban, it's not just also that khap panchayat. Okay, it's not just that those people from villages have come to power. It's also that they have the guns in their hand. They are fighting this battle for like Afghanistan itself is fighting a battle for more than 4 decades. There is another thing when we talk about this modernization process, so to say, is that, see, In India, because we were part of the British colony, we were a British colony, the progress trajectory or the development trajectory has been different. And the development trajectory similarly of countries who were under Russians or any other colonial power has been different. This Afghanistan, the country we know as Afghanistan, was never under any colonial power directly. Okay, so even under British, we know that in federally administered tribal area, these villages were kind of left to themselves. These British did not directly manage the affairs, and they didn't even try to do it. And Afghanistan, this concept of nation state is not there in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was never under this development trajectory. So the people who are there at the helm of the affairs, they have their own tribal and ethnic interest, and their outlook is determined by their own tribal and ethnic and sub-tribal interest. And based on those, so for example, a lot of what Taliban or local Afghans say is determined by, of course, Sharia and their interpretation of what Sharia is, and B, their own local culture, which is called Pashtunwali. Okay, so a lot of, like, say something like the khap we have in India. So it's like the lot of Afghans who were there in power, okay, earlier, I mean, for last 20 years. So many of them, their ministers and all, were very, like, say, educated in Harvard, in MIT, in Oxford, in Cambridge. And they, in fact, when I went to Afghanistan, I found people who were like, say modern to say than even me. Okay, in Kabul, they were more progressive than, say, I am. But those people have been in a way pushed to the background now. And the people who are now in power, they have not won any election. They have come to power by force, or they have come to power because there was vacuum. The government which was there literally ran away. And they ran away, and so they are there in the power. So it's not that Afghan people have chosen them. They have come, and they have. We also need to accept that whether we like Taliban or not, they have won this battle against USA, and they are, at least for now, they are going to be there in Afghanistan. How we need to deal with them is now what we need to decide. I think I answered your question.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot.
The discussion was very nice, and we all learned a lot. But my question is, why the Taliban want to establish a medievalism?
I think it's a continuation of the same question. So they want to. It's like, say. Again, the comparison would not be right, but it's like, say, the UP CM which we have. If a group of such yogis become, say, CM or PM and the ministers, so they will, of course, try to impose their version of, say, how they feel India should be. So the leaders of Taliban, they are, most of them, almost all of them, they are not very educated people. Okay, and even those who are educated, their leaders, okay, they are educated in those madrasas which were functioning on Afghanistan-Pakistan border, okay, or in some cities of or towns of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and where they studied the very not all of them are, in fact, even a scholar of Islam. They studied very rudimentary form of Islam, the very basic, and the focus have been on fighting. And so whatever little they understand about religion, whatever little understanding they have about, say, Islam, this is how. So for example, even say Iran is also a Muslim country, Turkey is also Muslim countries. These Taliban leaders, they have been living, some of these leaders have been living in Qatar for more than a decade now. Okay, but even say Taliban leaders are not ready to even implement rules for women, especially or for others, like it is in say Qatar. In Qatar, there are these women who are ministers. Qatar, Al Jazeera is in Qatar, and many of these TV journalists are working there in Qatar. But the Taliban, for good or for bad, they come from these rural areas, most of them, okay, and they studied in these madrasas, and they have been fighting. So most of them have very little interaction with women themselves. And their perception about how society should be is very different. In fact, just today I was reading, there is one report which came last night in BBC, and today TRT of Turkey has made a report of how within Taliban there is this fight going on of old school and the new political leadership which was there in Qatar, that we need to form more inclusive government where people from Hazara and other ethnicities need to be given representation, where women need to be given representation. And the old school who think no, like women should not be in the top leadership, like the ministers and all. So their interpretation of Islam or Sharia is that women should not, like women should have limited space. Women should not be at the decision-making places. They are ready to allow women to work in hospitals, in education sector, and in some other sectors, but not say in all sectors, and not in, especially in places where they will be interacting directly with males. So that is their version of Islam. This is not to so I'm not their spokesperson, but I'm just trying to explain how they see the system should be.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Sir. Sir, what do you think? How far this new formed Taliban government can survive with this inter-conflict between them?
This new government, that is a little at the moment. I think they will survive. It will depend on how they. So I know whatever little understanding of Afghanistan I have, I don't think this government, if in current forms, if they do not become more inclusive, yes, and I'm not talking about women per se just, but inclusive as in more inclusive in say allowing people from other groups, like say Tajik, how many Tajiks become part of the government, how many Hazaras become part of the government. So the government they have announced at the moment are predominantly Pashtun, and even within Pashtun, it's like that for old Taliban leaders. Okay, so if they run the affairs in the current form, I don't think this government, like there will be resentment, not immediately because everyone is tired from war actually, but eventually there will be resentment, and there will be another factor which will determine how long the government can last is the international actors. So will international actors recognize the government and provide them aid? So for example, 89 USSR withdrew, but Soviet disintegrated in 1992. So till 1992, President Najib was getting support of the USSR. I mean the financial support. And so he could sustain. But as soon as USSR disintegrated, he didn't have the money to run the government. So the problem in Afghanistan is largely aid dependent, foreign aid dependent. They are kind of a rentier state. So I'll give you just one example. The salary of the Afghan forces, the salary of the Afghan police largely came from the US, and it was same for almost all ministries. Okay, and we say in English, one who pays decides the tunes. So now Taliban is in power. Who will pay for the, like, for how long can Taliban sustain the country? Like, from where will they give salaries to all their staff? From where will they get money to run the country? If they can find some sources. The problem is Taliban at the moment does not want to. So Taliban has to maintain a very fine balance about not losing their support, which is, whether we like it or not, they drive this support from this religious conservatism. Okay, and so they they will not compromise a lot, because if they compromise on this religious concept, like say on how on their interpretation of Sharia, and on the position of women and so on, so then there will be problem within their core group of supporters. But on the other side, they have to draw a fine balance of, like, at least appear to be more inclusive. Okay, because like say foreign forces, I mean foreign governments, especially US and European Union and all, if they give some grant in the future, like 1.2 billion aid has been approved by foreign force powers, but they will always put some condition, like say you will have to have some representation of women, you need to apply, you need to allow girls to go to school. These kind of conditions will be put. Okay, and this will create like, how can Taliban find a balance between the two? That will determine how long the government will last. Okay, but at least for now I feel Taliban has won, and they will be there in power for now. For how long is a difficult question. The resistance, which so-called resistance, which started in Panjshir, has not got any direct foreign support. Okay, there have been, like say, some murmurs in India and in Iran of supporting this resistance. Okay, but I don't think they will get direct support unless, say, Western forces get. They will get some covert support for the time being. So there will be some pockets of resistance, but I think for the time being Taliban will stay there. Okay, for the time being. For how long, it is difficult to say at the moment. But I also feel that probably Taliban, if they want to be accepted, okay, they will have to form a more inclusive government, and they will also have to compromise on certain parameters, on certain conditions, like say allowing girls to go to school and colleges and other things. The problem with Taliban is, and with this I will end, is that, see, for 4 decades they were fighting. So for example, their soldiers or their commanders or their people are trained to fight. Okay, now they have been given the task of, say, giving security at 5-star hotels, at the ministry, in the government. Now this is not something which they have done. For example, they are on the road, okay, and now their protest begin. How to deal with? Now in India, our police have danda sticks to deal with the protesters, or there are these tear gases and all. Now they don't have all these things. They just have AK-47 or rifle in their hand. So what do? They just either they shoot or they beat with the butt of the gun. Okay, because they are not trained to do policing. That's not what they have been trained to. So that is creating problem in Afghanistan at the moment.
Thank you. If anybody has more questions, they can ask. Okay, sir. Can we sum up now?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Dr. Reyaz, for this very insightful lecture on the topic media representation of Afghan crisis. Dr. Reyaz covered many areas of Afghan crisis in his lecture. He talked about how in India we saw Afghanis in literature by Rabindranath Tagore, or in the Hindi Bollywood cinema 90s or before, in Khuda Gaba also. These and he very insightfully exclaimed that how these representation changes breeding terrorist portrayal in Bollywood films uh, between uh, before 20 years, in just 20 years, how it is changed. He also enlightened us about the Soviet press during the puppet government in Afghanistan and the representation of Taliban leaders as hero of peacemaking in the Western media, while there was puppet government in Afghanistan. Dr. Reyaz also pointed out the politics of representation. Uh, there are power game behind the media representation for any event which is occurring. It is very true. I am very delighted to have this thought in my mind. Actually, every situation, every event has a political side when it is coming to media. It is very true, sir. it it gone actually the lecture gone from very urban to a very local discourse, I must say. It is a very good narrative. Now I would like to call Safikul Alam, uh, who is my colleague at the Department of Mass Communication and Journalism, Kandra, Radha, to give the vote of thanks.